Hello everyone, and welcome to Global Food Safety Resources' first ever interactive online interview. I'm GFSR's Managing Editor, Susan Crossman, and I'm so very pleased to be here today with Frank Yiannas, who, as many of us know, is a renowned food safety expert currently serving as Vice President of Walmart. Walmart serves more than 200 million customers around the world every week, making it the world's largest food retailer. So Frank himself has earned many awards during his career and has served the cause of food safety as a past president of the International Association for Food Protection and as a past vice chair of the Global Food Safety Initiative. Frank is an adjunct professor in the food safety program at Michigan State University, and he's the author of two books, Food Safety Culture, Creating a Behavior-Based Food Safety Management System, and Food Safety Equals Behavior, 30 Proven Techniques to Enhance Employee Compliance. So Frank, thank you for joining us today.
My pleasure, thank you.
This is part one of a two-part series on food safety that GFSR is conducting with Frank, and the theme of today's interview is what is an effective food safety culture and what are the obstacles to its development? So Frank, I wanted to start out by asking you, first of all, what are the characteristics of an effective food safety culture? And even more basically, why is food safety culture so important?
Well, Susan, those are great questions. Let me begin by tackling the why portion of your question, which is why is a food safety culture important? And if you pause to think about it, if you see some of the major catastrophic safety events that have happened around the world, if you think about major oil spills, an automobile manufacturer and ignition switches failing, or if you think about the NASA shuttle disasters, at the end of the day, when the smartest men and women investigated those incidents and they reported back what was the contributing factor that most led to those disastrous outcomes, at the end of the day, the headlines always read a culture that allowed the BP oil spill, or a culture that allowed, ignition switches to fail, or a culture that allowed a shuttle to be designed or decisions to be made that resulted in a shuttle disaster. And so culture, what people think, believe, say, and do is probably some of the most important issues related to safety in any profession, and I think it's true for food safety as well. And so that's why it's so important. In fact, if you look at some of the food outbreaks of our day, whether it's peanut butter or others, I would suggest that those outbreaks have as much to do or more to do with culture than they do about microbial survival in a low moisture pH or low moisture food such as peanut butter. So it's pretty important. Yeah. What are some common attributes? What I've found over the years is that while there are companies with great food safety cultures, no two great food safety cultures are alike. But there are some common themes that I believe they have. And so let me just give you a few themes that I think are pretty consistent amongst organizations that have great food safety cultures. Number one is they generally do a pretty good job of explaining food safety expectations for employees at all levels of their organizations. What do they expect them to do around food safety? What are the behaviors that they have to demonstrate? So they have clear food safety expectations. Number two, organizations that are really good at this do a good job of training and educating all of their employees on food safety. And note that I draw a distinction between education and training because they're different. Number three, I find that great food safety cultures spend a lot of time communicating about food safety. And so communication and culture are two sides of the same coin. And so if you were to walk into an organization that had a strong food safety culture, you would hear them talking about food safety, writing about food safety, signs and symbols about food safety. It would be part of their communication. Number four, organizations that are good at this establish goals, because goals are the antecedent to behavior. So they're really good at setting goals for food safety. And then they also measure to make sure that they're performing well and that they're making progress. And then the last attribute that I think is pretty common is organizations that have strong food safety cultures create consequences for food safety. and realizing that consequences aren't necessarily a negative thing. There are positive consequences and negative consequences, but there are consequences for performance. And generally, organizations that have strong food safety cultures place a lot of emphasis on positive consequences for strong food safety performance.
Excellent. Wow, that's a lot. That's a lot. So then when we think about companies that do not have a strong food safety culture, is it safe to say then that they would be companies that do not exhibit any or many of those characteristics that you've just described?
Yeah, I would say those characteristics would be often missing, most of them, if not all of them, and they'd be approaching food safety quite differently.
One comment that I came across on one of the videos I saw of you recently was where you made a comment that success often comes from food safety training that is about what's not working, or there was something around what doesn't work. Teach people what doesn't work rather than what they should be doing. Is that, I may not be paraphrasing you very well, but could you say a few words about that concept?
Sure.
If you recall.
You know, when you look at creating a strong food safety culture, you have to have different tools in your toolbox. They're not the traditional tools that I think food safety professionals generally use. And they're tools based on proven behavioral science principles. And so one of the proven behavioral science principles is that people tend to learn better or more effectively through the mistakes of others as opposed to just being taught how to do food safety the right way. I call it teaching food safety the right way and also through the wrong way by the lessons learned mistakes in the past. And so it's very, I think, astute to actually teach food safety the right way, but also use some lessons learned from other organizations that have made mistakes and how those mistakes have resulted in severe, tragic consequences.
Right. Brilliant idea, actually. I like that one a lot. I'd also be interested in knowing, Frank, if you feel there are barriers that can either prevent a company from establishing a food safety culture or maybe slow their progress towards it?
Yeah, there are. I think a couple of the barriers are, number one, just this concept of complacency. If a culture or organization has an attitude of complacency, it's going to be hard for them to make progress. I love trying to define complacency because in the profession we often talk about don't become complacent, and we often really wonder, well, what does that really mean? And so to me, complacency is, an organization that's unaware of some type of danger that lurks ahead. They're just unaware of it. And so if you're unaware of it, you're more likely to not want to have a strong food safety culture. And I think organizations become complacent for a few reasons. One is they're overconfident. They think they're doing a pretty good job. They haven't had a problem in the past, so why should they worry about it now? They don't realize that the world around them is changing. There are tools such as whole genome sequencing that make detection so much more likely today than years in the past. We certainly have social media. And if they're operating with an old mindset or with an old paradigm, it's going to be hard for them to make progress. A good example is a very well-known ice cream manufacturer that had an outbreak. They'd been in existence 108 years, had never had a problem, had never had a recall, and you could see where their past successes might have naturally led them down a path of complacency. So that's one. I think the other thing that makes organizations maybe become complacent is a lack of knowledge and expertise. They think that food safety can be done just by relying on the traditional tools of inspections and training, and not really understanding the difference between a food safety program and a food safety culture. So I think those two factors are really important in terms of preventing companies from establishing strong food safety cultures.
Excellent. Yeah, that's a lot. Again, there's so much in it. I'm sure your books go into it in a lot more detail, but that's very helpful. Finally, my last question for today is, are there some definite no-nos in the work of establishing an effective food safety culture? Things that you really shouldn't be doing?
Well, there's so many no-nos. Number one would be by just trying to approach a food safety culture as a slogan and not truly a science. I often find that people like to use this phrase, food safety culture. It's become a bit of a buzzword in the profession, but we really need to pause and understand what it is and what it isn't. And so if you're thinking it's just a slogan or a marketing campaign, I suspect that company organization is not going to be successful. And so that's a no-no, realizing it's not just a slogan or a communication campaign, but it's a way of doing business based on the science of human behavior and organizational culture, which is an evolving and expanding science in and of itself. That would be a no-no. Number two is thinking that you're going to do this or create a food safety culture using the existing tools in your toolbox. Meaning, okay, we're just going to lean in on inspections and training and maybe testing, because the tools that you use to create a food safety culture are different, as I said. So over the past 50 years, there's been an explosion of, insights into human behavior and many behavioral science studies published and documented in the literature. And so you have to approach it using different skill sets, maybe using different expertise in the organization, maybe even reaching outside the organization. And so those are two of the big no-nos I think that companies tend to sometimes make mistakes on in this.
Interesting. Yeah, very interesting. And unfortunately, that's about all the time we have for today. So Frank, on behalf of GFSR and all of our site visitors, I'd like to thank you for being such a great champion for food safety and also for making yourself available for us today. Much appreciated. I know you're a busy person, so thank you for the time.
My pleasure, and thank you, GFSR, for helping us get the word out.
Yeah, it's a big deal. It's an important thing. Just a reminder that this is a two-part interview series with Frank, and I invite you to join us next time when we will be focusing on the topic of what are the key elements required to establish a food safety culture. If anyone would like further information about Global Food Safety Resource or wish to gain access to our information hub, which is chock full of a lot more additional interactive online content with other leading food safety subject matter experts, I invite you to visit our website at www.globalfoodsafetyresource.com. And until next time, please remember that together we can make food safe.